Welcome to Because You Need to Know. I am Edwin K. Morse, President and founder of Pioneer Knowledge Services. This series is your digital resource of valuable conversations with nonprofit and knowledge management enthusiasts from across industries and from around the globe.
Hey, I'm Ivan Butina. I'm a knowledge management specialist, currently working with the UNICEF out of headquarters in New York. I'm a knowledge management specialist. I've been doing this for 8 years now, but I also have a history in social and political activism, and also I'm very much interested in leadership development, a field that I'm getting increasingly engaged to. My passion is really working with young people, youth. That's really what inspires me, energizes me the most. A little background about my personal history. I actually was born in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Sarajevo, the city and place I had to leave because of the war in 92. I was 8 years old. I moved to Italy with my mother. Back then I was a refugee, and that's where I grew up until I moved to the US for my master's degree. And this is where I developed myself as a professional and as an adult.
You are a citizen of the planet.
Yep.
You come from multiple cultural and ethnic backgrounds. How does that add value, do you think, in your work and knowledge management?
It's important because knowledge, as we always say, it's something that flows, right? It's something that stays with people, and people by definition are different. We're different as individuals, but also, of course, we have other identity components, one of which is culture or and everything that makes us our culture identity, like language, religion, habits have been developed over centuries or decades. I still kind of like struggle to define myself as citizen of the planet because I actually lived only in Europe and in the US, and I still haven't visited several continents. But it's true that within my own context, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a very, at least a religiously diverse country. I don't like to use the word ethnicity because I believe we are all the same there, the same people, just because of history, kind of developed different religious related differences. But, just later, because of the war, growing up in Italy, getting to know this way of thinking, which is more Latin, Southern European, and then having my dad who actually he moved to Belgium, in the Flemish part of Belgium, which is kind of more Germanic culture way of thinking. I think being exposed from early age to the Slavic, the Latin, and the Germanic way of thinking in the European context already enabled me to appreciate differences, the way people are. And approach the world in different ways. And I think this is very much related to knowledge because while it's true that the field of knowledge management has developed in, I would say, in Northern America and parts of Europe, knowledge itself is all over the world. And this is, in fact, in the field of development, which is where I work. We increasingly over the last, I would say, 10 years for sure, maybe more. And this is accelerated. We are recognizing knowledge is not just there's rich knowledge in communities that we actually are there to serve, and the contextual knowledge, so on. So I think this definitely helps a little bit. Again, I say I have so much still to learn and appreciate the differences. But working environments like the UNICEF, for example, I used to be in the World Bank, definitely helps.
Because you're dealing with cultural elements to which knowledge has probably a little different definition, just like organizations. They have their different ideas of what is valuable and what's not valuable, and what's transferable and what should be transferable amongst the culture or the organization. What is the biggest challenge with the clients you work with? Are you dealing with clients outside of UNICEF, or is this internal operations?
For me, it's internal. So I'm coordinating the knowledge management at the global level, so for the whole of UNICEF. So yeah, if you want to use the word clients, I support our internal staff. So they actually can have the tools, the guidance, the good practices that can adapt in their own context, yes. But even if I work with them internally, it's important to be aware of this, right? So for example, the fact that, it's not just about technical knowledge, it's not just about the expertise, that what the research says, what the evaluation says about, I feel like ECD, early child development early on, but it's also about contextual knowledge. For example, more and more appreciate the fact that national staff, the people who are from a country, work in a country, actually have knowledge that maybe technical expert with a PhD degree, might not have. So it's really being aware of that is important, even if I don't work with communities directly right now.
So how do you get the culture to share? How does UNICEF plant the seeds of propagating more sharing across and within the organization?
I find that UNICEF this is just my personal experience, but we don't have much of a culture of, for example, if we want to talk about the opposite, which is knowledge hoarding, I think it's a pretty, if I may use the word, chilled culture, right? Which is and maybe because UNICEF has a reputation of being an organization of doers, being more in the field. Is kind of atypical for the, let's say, the UN environment. I mean, we also have our own bureaucracies, etc. But
That's what I was wondering. You're kind of saying words that could describe an anti-bureaucratic or
exactly.
autocratic structure where you've got administrators, running channels and divisions and containers of people and process.
And we have that.
Okay.
We have that,
Okay.
but I think it always depends which where you come from. I think compared to other, for example, agents, organization in the field, we probably are a little bit less. I don't think so much about structures because we have, in my opinion, still very heavy structures. But I think it's more about the culture of the people. I haven't seen so much an issue in knowledge sharing. It's really more, we have, I think, many organizations like a problem of overflow of information, too much production of documents, especially the explicit knowledge, codified knowledge. And so really, and people being like really also busy in developing, in implementing the programs, projects, etc. It's really more the issue of finding time to access the knowledge they need and using it. But I think knowledge sharing is not a barrier in our context. It's more like selecting and using.
So it almost sounds like your organization may be really ripe for developing a business intelligence cell that can start the analysis and extraction of all this content. Does that fall into the knowledge management realm now?
This is a we have had fascinating discussions about all this because UNICEF, I've been there only 2 years. So I still see it kind of like from a little bit of external point of view, but it's an organization that has invested a lot from what I'm gathering in the past years, so-called evidence functions, making sure we have a research capacity, making sure we have data collection, analysis capacity, making sure we have a strong evaluation function. Those are the so-called or program monitoring functions. These are all like so-called evidence generation functions. But then, okay, once you collect and generate the evidence, how do you transform that into programs? Like how do you close the feedback loop and how to make sure that they're used?
Right.
And let's not forget, it's not only about evidence, it's also about experiential knowledge, like we said earlier. What the knowledge in our heads, there's not necessarily in the report and research on the data that we collect. So let's not forget that. So I see this, my personal opinion, but it's a discussion we're having that knowledge management is a connector of all these evidence functions and is a connector with the other sources of knowledge, like tacit knowledge, implicit knowledge, and is what enables all this evidence and knowledge to be actually implemented in programs. So we are the connection between, I think, the work, the programs, the projects, and the sources of evidence and knowledge. So this is how I see KM. But you're right. We are ripe because the organizations have invested a lot in the past in this evidence generation.
Yeah. Well, that's an exciting place to be, right? Because that sets you up for a great world of expansion and added value. If we go back to the value of what you're doing and what's being done for the organization, if you've already got a culture that is already okay with the cross-pollination of thought, ideas, conversation, but it's still a structure that's pretty set in stone, so to speak. This element of what knowledge management could help provide as a return on investment of all this research and data, because to me, the data and the collection of data is the easiest thing to do. That's like storage and taxonomies and things like that is like a foundational piece. But if that's all you've done is built the foundation, okay, now what? That only serves a certain amount of customers, so to speak. But in an organization I used to work in military intelligence, there was a thing that was called OBE.
Mm-hmm.
OBE is overcome by events. You get such a flood of reports and data and information and all these things that eventually you just become overwhelmed and stuff gets on the floor. I mean, stuff just lands on the floor because you just don't have time to consume it and understand it. So that is a critical piece. It's a critical piece that is exciting because it is entrepreneurial, right? You get to figure out and be part of that. So is there anybody in leadership that you say you have had discussions, so where has that fallen? What's the future?
So this is an interesting thing. What we're doing in knowledge management and is a function that does not have prominence. is a function that, we have only, I think UNICEF has between 33 and 35 staff in an organization of 15,000. And most of these are people like myself who are in headquarters, on regional offices, a few in country offices. UNICEF has this very decentralized structure with offices all over the world. And, like KM, knowledge management itself doesn't have prominence. However, you use the key word, which is entrepreneurial. And this is what we have done over the past 2 years, saying, okay, we don't have the prominence, we're not have not been a priority as a KM in the past years. However, being under the radar sometimes also allows you to be able to do things without having to ask too many permissions, right? And do good stuff, right? Experiment and try and pilot.
Right.
And I have to say that sometimes you need the entrepreneurial spirit, you need to seize opportunities, but also need to supportive leadership where it matters. So I don't need necessarily like the top management to be supportive, but if you have a supervisor, if you have a manager, if you have a director right above you who are supportive, that's enough. And if you have a network and a community to work with, which is energetic, that's a good thing about our CAM network, because yes, we might have only 33 staff, but guess what? We have a network of 700 plus staff. They might have different titles, but they all engage KM. And like we always say, KM is not that it's everyone's job, because sometimes when you say that, it can mean no one's job. And what we are saying is that everyone has a role to play with it, And I don't care how many staff KM would have. I mean, of course, if we had more staff, I'd be happier. But even if you don't have more KM positions, as long as there's a function that's embedded in people's work and everyone has a role to play in a meaningful way, then yes, that's fine. It's not about imposing KM. I always say people kill KM as a KM, but if we keep doing it, I'm still happy. So it's not about recognizing KM, it's about adding the value of KM, then call it whatever you want. That's my personal opinion that I developed over the past years.
It is amazing the amount of people in the world that would just as soon lose the terminology of knowledge management because it has some baggage with it, and it has misconceptions with it, and it has almost a little bit of what I want to say is like a passing paradigm or a passing business item that people like, oh yeah, well, we did that a couple of years ago, we're not going to do that again, kind of like a transitory way of doing business. But don't you think that's changed? You're aware of the knowledge management ISO standard for knowledge management?
I think it's this is a question has come up not a lot, but it has come up when you ever set to discuss KM in an organization like and people from outside might ask, well, how much this definition of standards by ISO is important. In the end, you know what? The people in your organization don't really care so much. And honestly, even when I thought at the beginning, like we just developed our strategy, I thought at the beginning, let's just leverage this. This was supposed to, ISO definition was supposed to do, help organizations, help practitioners say, hey, this is a serious thing. We have standards. But you know what? In the end, I'm a very practical, pragmatic person. People in a specific organization, maybe it's different contexts, but in my experience so far, and I'm not talking about UNICEF, but also other experience I have, they care only about the added value you give in the context you're at. They don't care about standards or whatever research you can bring. Maybe it works in different cultures, but in this case, it does not add that much value. In fact, what we did in the end, what really helps us is have our own definition of knowledge management, have our own definition, understanding of knowledge management that works for us. And that's what matters in the end, because it's all about adding value. It's all about improving our effectiveness, about making sure that whatever we do, actually we have access to knowledge and experience that we need, that we keep learning and improving and adapting. I mean, and that's about it. And if we can find our definition and that help us do that, so that we're on the same page, we do the same things, we don't have different understanding, then the job is done. Yeah.
So tell me, what's the definition of knowledge management, my friend?
So it's very simple. We define knowledge management as the set of practices that we put in place to capture, organize, share, and use knowledge to achieve results and for children and advance their rights. That's it. Very simple, 4 steps. There are different steps in knowledge cycle, which was 4 to simplify it. And it has to be about achieving results, advancing rights for children. That's it.
So how does this get embedded or aligned to the strategic view of the organization?
Right now, what we're doing, we have a medium-term strategy. And this is about setting I call it kind of like filling in the gaps. It's not that I call it, we call this in strategy, filling in the gaps that we currently have globally as an organization KM, right? So what we're doing over the next 2 years, we already started, is creating a bunch of public goods, whether it's tools, templates, guidance, platforms, a couple of platforms like a KM Hub, external sharing platform, in a learning program, so we can start developing staff capacity that will enable us to develop this KM capacity overall needed to align with the next strategic plan of UNICEF, because now UNICEF is developing its new strategic plan. So then after these 2 years, as we kind of like cover the basics of KM, because this is our first global KM strategy, then the next strategy will be aligned with the new strategic plan, where we say, okay, let's use all this public goods we had developed, that we had piloted, because we do piloting of them in country offices in particular, then actually to advance the goals of the organization. And that's where we're going to align in the next strategy. So this has been intentional. Right now, let's focus on building the basics, and then later we're going to align. But in the pilots already, we'd already be aligning, because when you had to use these tools and guidance and templates, skills development, of course, in the office, you have to do it aligned with your office goals and organizational goals. So that's important.
Well, I'm interested to ask is, in the global footprint that you affect as an organization, is there a specific continental or citizenry base, cultural base, regional base that is more adaptable to knowledge management versus others? Have you seen a difference in the application of knowledge management practices and behaviors dependent upon region?
Yes, but I don't know if I wouldn't be able to say if it's because of cultures, or if it's because of personalities, or the organizational culture in that region, right? Because maybe UNICEF has developed in a specific region its own culture that has nothing to do with the country, ethnic, human cultural element. But definitely there are differences. I mean, you can see that there's more appetite and interest in some regions versus others, some countries that are others, as we have this wide network. But it would be honestly like it would be just a guess. Thinking, is it why? Is it because of special leadership, because certain people have left a footprint, etc., etc.
Well, I'll challenge you and your organizational impact of knowledge management. I think that would be a good to know, not a nice to know, but a good to know, because you are dealing in knowledge flow. In my experience, there are certain cultures that are just, I hate to say better, but there are some cultures that are just more adaptable to doing storytelling and sharing information and sharing knowledge versus others. And I'm always interested to find out what are the mechanics under the hood, so to speak, of why. Because it could give you some leverage to know, oh, we're going to this part of the world. Well, we need to adjust a little bit to adapt to that culture. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if it would have to play into a strategic view, I would think, when you're dealing with such a world-connected organization.
Absolutely. No, that's an excellent point. However, the two elements there, one is like interacting with the civil society and the communities and so on. And I do believe, I totally agree with you. Like, for example, if we were to advise an office that is in a certain country and region versus in different one, definitely that will be part of the conversation. So, who do you work with? What is the culture of the government there? What is the culture of society there? What is the culture of communities? Some can approaches might work there and some others not. And we need to choose the right ones. Luckily, now we have a huge menu of approaches. Thanks to our, larger Camp for Development community that we're all part of, right? So, but choosing the right approach, I think that's where the culture is so important, because something that, might work in a country like Nigeria might not necessarily work in a country like India, vice versa. So that's yes. But the culture of the offices, and this is where probably the bureaucracy come in, and the hierarchy is very much affected by its own organizational specific cultures, not UNICEF, but specifically the office. And plus, on top of that, personality of the manager of that office, right? And that's where, some people are more like process oriented, tell me what to do, how to do it, and we're just going to implement it. Some people are more like have a conversation, do storytelling. And that's when you can be, I don't know, in Senegal, or you can be in Malaysia. It doesn't matter. The point is, if that office has a culture that's a certain way, and a manager who is a certain way, that office internally has to do things according to that or its own culture. So yeah, those are the two layers. But I agree with you. If you interact with the outside communities, yes, the country context specific culture is important. I mean, one thing, and this is, I don't know what your impression is, but being plugged for several years now in the general like KM for development community, what is interesting to me, I said earlier how KM, my observation is really has been strongest so far in Northern America and in certain European countries, say the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, for example, very weak in Italy. In the Balkans, I don't know if people know what KM is, like very few, probably Italy is the same. However, I've seen a flourishing of KM in regions of Africa, for example, the African continent, especially Kenya. I have an impression it's become a really KM hub, but also in Western Africa, Southern African countries. I think that's a continent that's really, from KM point of view, I feel that is basically becoming like kind of North America and parts of Europe in terms of like development of KM. So that's something that will be interesting, for example, to explore.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience and your understanding of that world of knowledge management and the work you do. This was extremely informative. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Edwin.
Because You Need to Know is designed to bring people's experience and their knowledge forward to be shared. I'm Edwin K. Morris, and I thank you for joining in to listen to another conversation brought to you as a public service of Pioneer Knowledge Services, a nonprofit tax-exempt organization with a charitable knowledge management purpose. Find us online at pioneer-ks.org and add your voice to the conversation on Facebook.